The term Alberta beef is synonymous globally with exceptional cuts of meat, delicious taste, and yet only 2% of Canada's population is actually involved in the production of said agriculture. So, what exactly does it take to run Canada's beef industry? Well, hey there. Welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. In this series, host Adam Legg talks to Alberta's top CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about their journey to the C-suite, what keeps them up at night as an Albertan and as a leader in their industry, and what their outlook is for the future. On today's episode, we speak with Kee Jim, the managing director at Kee Jim Farms and the global head of animal health and agriculture for TELUS Agriculture. We talked to Kee about his journey from high school to the C-suite, what it takes to run the world's biggest feedlot, the future of Alberta's beef and feedlot industries, and key innovations coming out of the agri-food industry. And if you found this episode interesting or insightful, let us know by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a quick review and a rating. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to another C-Suite Unplugged podcast. And today we're going to talk about Kee Jim and the cattle sector. Alberta has a long and proud history in the cattle sector. One of the calling cards of our province is that amazing Alberta beef. Today we're lucky to be joined by Kee Jim, a leader, innovator, and operator in the sector here and globally. He runs a number of businesses in the industry, which we'll hear all about, and has done a lot to advance opportunities in Alberta and beyond. He's no stranger to the podcast, as he joined us way back, the early days of the pandemic on May 7th, 2020, to talk about what was at that time a crisis in the beef industry. But we're here today to step back a bit, learn a bit more about him and the opportunities for Alberta. Kee, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be back.
Wonderful. Well, Kee, we're going to have a variety of conversation here today on a few topics, but one of the things that people love is to know a little bit more about our members, our CEOs, and understanding the paths that got them to where they are today. And so would love, perhaps tell us a little bit about the journey of Kee finishing high school, looking at the whole world in front of him to where you are today. What did that journey look like?
Well, it's a bit of an interesting story. I grew up in a very small town, less than 100 people, 60 miles north of Kamloops, British Columbia. A small village called Littlefort. And so not very big. Went to a one-room schoolhouse from grade 1 to 6, right? And then had to travel 20 miles by bus to get to high school in Barrier, BC. All I knew at that point in time, from high school, was I really wanted badly to get out of the small town. Right? Didn't really care what it was, but I thought, I want to go see what's out there, right? In the rest of the world. Our family ran a small ranch. We also ran the general store in the town, and we also had a fishing camp business. So it was really from the fishing camp business that I gained a bit of better perspective on the outside world.
Yeah.
Many customers that were from various parts of Canada and the US. And by interacting with them, was able to realize that I needed, find something. So I enrolled at UBC in Vancouver, and I was there for 2 years just in general sciences. And after 2 years time frame, I applied for veterinary college and got in, right? So I was pretty young. I graduated from high school when I was 16, right? So, pretty young here, but not entirely sure why I gravitated to veterinary medicine. Had some experience, with the ranch and various things, but it just seemed, I met a few people and asked what they were doing, right, in undergrad. And so I thought, well, I guess I'm going to do that. Right?
Interesting.
So I started in Saskatoon and graduated in 1983. Western College of Veterinary Medicine, and that's 40 years ago. This June, right? That I've since then. So quite a bit of a journey there. But it was during my time at vet school itself that I developed the idea that I wanted to be a feedlot veterinarian, right, and specialize in feedlot production. And so if you wind the clock back over that time frame, Veterinarians were not really specialists at that point in time. They were general practitioners, large animal, small animal, but there was a rapidly emerging feedlot industry in Western Canada, principally in Alberta, that started in the late 70s. And it looked to me as a fantastic opportunity, right, to get involved in an industry right in the beginning. So right after graduation in June of '83, I moved to Okotoks, Alberta, just south of Calgary, because that was really where the two centers of growth for feedlot was in and around Calgary and in and around Lethbridge. Seemed like it was too windy in Lethbridge, so I decided to settle in Okotoks.
Yeah.
And in July of '83, I secured my first feedlot client, which was situated in High River, and got started in feedlot in consulting. So what really began as a one-person show over the last 4 decades really has evolved into the world's largest feedlot consulting company. Provide services to over 4.5 million head of cattle annually, and it's grown from originally an animal health focus to the complete production consulting service, sort of the Walmart of consulting for feedlots. We offer consulting in all areas of procurement, of production, of marketing, and have grown to include over 50 professional consultants, either veterinarians or PhD animal scientists. And we have a staff of, I think, around 140 total. And we've gone from providing services in Western Canada to across Canada, across the US, Mexico, and several other countries as well. Approximately 2 years ago, the Feedlot Health Management Services, the entire company was sold to TELUS Agriculture. And at the time, and they continue to do so, TELUS was aggregating a number of companies in the ag sector, right? And they bought numerous companies and have put it together under the TELUS umbrella. I remain with TELUS today as the global head of animal health. From the feedlot health perspective, right? That's a very quick summary of the last 40 years.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, though, we have a parallel stream of another entity, Kee Jim Farms, which again started in 1984 and started pretty small. I bought 6% of a group of 300 head at a custom feedlot, so that's 18 head of cattle. And I had it financed 90%. So I think the net equity was 2, right? At that point in time, right? And over many decades, Kee Jim Farms has grown into one of the largest cattle feeding entities in North America. And I have production facilities and cattle across Canada and the US in most geographies where cattle are raised. Right, so an exponential growth of that business over the last 40 years as well.
Wow, that's amazing, Kee.
In the last 15 to 20 years, most of the growth of Kee Jim Farms has actually been in the US. Right, just as an anecdote. We'll get into that more later.
Yeah, we'll explore why the US has been more of an attractive place. But I mean, fascinating, Kee. Sounds like there's the adage, timing is everything, and it sounds like you absolutely hit the perfect timing for specialization in the feedlot sector, both from as you say, a consulting side, but also as an operator. That just it's amazing how timing does just work so perfectly. So just brilliant thinking on your part for sure.
Well, I think you hit an important thing. Timing is critical, right? So you can have the best idea at the worst time, it doesn't work. I had some, reasonably good ideas, and the timing was perfect, right? Yeah. So things that followed worked along, and then the two businesses, have very good synergy between them as well, right? So by, being heavily involved in all aspects of the feedlot operations through the consulting, you learn pretty quickly what the right ideas were, right? And your own operations that, that much more accessible.
Yeah. You mentioned you were raised on your family had a ranch in BC, but also it's interesting to hear that you didn't necessarily have any real rationale other than other folks were taking veterinary medicine. But you think, was there an aspect of ranching that was sort of in the blood, sort of drew you to the feedlot specialization?
Yeah. I think an attraction to cattle, right? I've always really enjoyed, enjoyed the cattle side of things. The ranch was founded by my father in 1943, right? And it was essentially a seed stock cow-calf operation. So, and it didn't involve the feedlot piece at all, right? So I really didn't have any background in feedlot production, right? But had, a reasonable background in beef cattle production. But at the time, I was not enthralled with the idea of a conventional large animal practitioner, especially for beef cattle. So I didn't go to veterinary college with the belief that I would, I was going to do that, right? I wasn't sure exactly where it was going to lead, but, I was fortunate that after a couple of years there, I got focused on the whole feedlot idea and had a very good mentor along the way. One of my professors, Eugene Jansen, who's still active today, and got me focused on the feedlot, and I could see what the business possibilities were, right, to make a real viable business, a large scale business out of doing consultation work with feedlots.
Oh, that's fascinating. Was there something was it that professor that really drew your attention to it, or had you done your own research to see the opportunities in feedlot as emerging business line?
A little bit of both. I developed a bit of an interest in it, but then, Eugene was specializing in servicing the feedlot sector from the vet college, and, was developing some innovative ideas for service. He was developing a computer data collection system, which I worked on and was involved with, and it equipped me with the knowledge of how to set that up, because chute side data collection was one of the innovations that came along that I was able to bring to the feedlot sector. So a very good background, and put me in a good spot right from graduation to pursue it. Because really what was happening is that the emerging sector, was not attracting people quickly enough to provide service and say, that's what I'm going to do, right? What I did that was different was saying, I'm not doing anything else. This is what I'm doing, right? Singular, right? And this is what we're going to make work. I think the idea of making it your only concern, and then it pretty much, you're sink or swim, you're either going to make it work or you're not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That really helps you focus.
Yeah, necessity is the mother of invention. So yeah, you definitely get that focus. Key people love to hear, the average day of an executive, CEO, and an entrepreneur. What do your days look like? What's a day in the life of Kee Jim look like? Any routines or practices that you have consistently?
Yeah, I would say that I spend roughly half of my time traveling, right? For the business, and roughly half of my time in the office. Our corporate office for both Feedlot Health and Kee Jim is located at Alderside, just outside of Okotoks. And I guess my colleagues say that I'm a bit of a dinosaur in many regards, because I love physically coming into the office, right? So when I do not work from home, I don't do anything from my house other than my phone, right? I do not have a home office. I don't like working from home. So I love coming into the office, and I like to interact with, people, one-on-one. And I'm of the belief that, the office is a great spot to create, an environment for really better communication, knowledge sharing, and all of those things. But like I say, many of my colleagues just say that's because I just don't get it. And that could well be true. I'm not, I think people can be highly successful in, hybrid models, and, the world's obviously post-COVID and even pre-COVID evolving more into, sort of dual workplace type environments and what have you. But
Yeah.
it's not for me, I can assure you, right? I just want to come in and do it, and then when I go home, I want to go home. So I'm not a work remotely person, but when I get to the office, I mean, my days are really consist of three things, right? It's serious numbers of emails, right? Probably 200 plus, right, daily for me. And again, a bit of an anachronism. I like talking on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And so do most of my either clients or business associates. So we're all in our early 60s, and for us, talking on the phone to the major collaborators is a daily event.
Yeah.
And yeah, we text a bit and we do that, but most of the time we talk on the phone, which pretty much drives everyone else crazy, right? Where your light's always red, or so it seems.
Get the busy signal.
Yeah. And then obviously the various, Zoom calls and, personal, the one-on-one meetings. For me, I'd rather meet in person than, any other way. But again, these probably habits that can't be corrected at this point in my career. So when I'm in the office, I like to be here, and I sure like to interact with everyone that's around me. I guess one of my other, common practices is I read a lot, very voracious reader, lots of material to get through on business newsletters, lots of stuff in the ag space, probably subscribe to 15 different news type services, right? And, I'm always reading to that stuff. And also, the scientific literature and keeping up with things directly in veterinary space and in the consulting space as well.
Right.
So I've always been very intrigued by feedlot production, and I've never been able to say, even though we've got people far more capable than myself these days around me to do this stuff, I still can't help myself. I have to keep right in the middle of all of the information and the things that are emerging.
Yeah, it's amazing the information overload that exists out there, and the vastness of the information. How to parse out what's useful, what's not, is always a challenge.
And then when traveling, I'm visiting the numerous production sites that I either own or I'm involved with, or I'm visiting feedlot health clients. Again, maybe the ag space is a little bit different, but would be impossible to run either business or be involved without a willingness to travel and visit people where they live, right? That's a key part of success in all of these businesses, is the one-on-one connection. It's a serious expectation of, in the ag sector, and probably differentiates it a fair bit from many other service industries and things that I see, right? Where it does create some limitations when the one-on-one connectivity is required, right? It presents scaling challenges and things like that. Yep. But I just can't see how someone would be successful in either business without a willingness to travel a lot, and also a willingness to take a lot of calls.
Yeah. You've got to be accessible for your clients, and, as you say, meet them where they're at. Exactly. Kee, a successful entrepreneur, innovator, what advice would you have someone starting their career? Anything you'd tell them that they should do, or conversely shouldn't do?
Yeah, I guess we're in the world of self-help, right? 40 years ago, there was one or two business books about how to do things, and now there's probably literally hundreds of thousands, right? There's newsletters and all this sorts of stuff on how to do it. I've thought about that a fair bit lately. I've been trying to do some mentorship stuff, both formally and informally, right, for various groups in and around Calgary. And I guess one thing that strikes me is that, I think it's a quote from Ayn Rand, where you never abandon the conviction of your own mind. And I think that's fairly important. If I looked at, in starting up both Kee Jim Farms and Feedlot Health, of course, because it's something a little bit different and a little bit new, People say, well, it'll never work, right? It'll never succeed. The people around you, and some friends and some not so friendly. I mean, there's always mass skepticism, and if it hasn't been done and obviously and visibly, right, then a lot of people have, serious doubts about whether it can actually occur, right? So I think you have to learn to live with the detractors and the dissenting viewpoints. Learn what you can from the dissenting viewpoints when you're starting up a business, but never abandon the conviction of your own mind. And also, you can get great motivation from detractors, right? And I'm one of those kind of people that I might be better motivated by people telling me I can't than I can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how my brain works. Just tell me I can't.
Yeah, right? You'll prove them wrong.
And I think that's what happens. But I think it ties into something else. So I think it ties into the fact that when I see a lot of these young entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs, they're convinced they have to have this massively new, disruptive, totally innovative idea in order to be successful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't believe that's true at all.
Interesting.
If I go back and looked at, the idea behind Feedlot Health and Kee Jim were not transformative ideas. People have talked about doing it, right? And so the idea is not my unique idea. That I think is an essential part where, the odds of having something truly and massively unique and innovative is very slim.
Yeah.
If you think about, the really true original ideas that have occurred throughout the history of mankind, what you're way better off doing is listening to all of the ideas and synthesizing those ideas into a business plan, right? And carrying out through better strategy, through better tactics, through better execution, actually getting done what others have theorized or procrastinated about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. So I think it's action that I don't think the original inventor of most things actually is the one that monetizes.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
it does happen, and people are highly celebrated that do, right, that have everything from the original idea all the way through to the final business plan. But to me, that's a unicorn.
Yeah.
Right. It's far more, way easier and more common, right, to do it the way I did by looking at all the ideas and pulling it together into a coherent model.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
You just, because remember, the true pioneers, they take a lot of arrows, right? So
yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure you want to be exactly that, but you want to be very capable of recognizing a superior idea and approach and quickly mobilizing and getting it done. Right. Mm-hmm. That's my key attribute, is I can get things done.
Yeah.
Right. I know how to move. Right. But I don't have to have the world's most brilliant ideas. I think the final thing that I mentioned to people as well is that doesn't really matter what career, profession, occupation, or whatever you're in, you have to be a lifelong learner at that. Mm-hmm. And you have to be constantly improving your craft daily.
Yeah.
Right. You should get through the day and you should say to yourself, well, what can I do better today than I could yesterday? Or what do I understand better?
Yes.
Right. Because it is continuous improvement, gradual improvement that leads one to become a domain expert. You can't absorb all the information in 24 hours.
Yeah.
Right. So you've got to keep at it relentlessly. Right. To improve what your capabilities and what you're doing. And I mean, absolutely relentless. Right. That's the whole, that's the whole key. And it's just the aggregation of all of that, right, over a time frame that creates distinct business separation between yourself and your competitors.
Yeah. Continuous learning, advancement, improvement. Kee, as we close out the section on you, is there one thing people will be surprised to learn about you?
I'll talk about that a bit. I think they'd be surprised to hear that my major obsession is at home is cooking.
Yes.
I'm an amateur chef, and I like to cook all different types of food. And even though I don't do any work at home, I spend a lot of time messing up the kitchen, much to my wife's dismay.
Well, you've
I'm a
got
pretty good cook, but not so good on the cleaning side, apparently.
Oh, there you go. That's the continuous improvement side to work on from there. Yes, I remember you telling me you quite a foodie and you've traveled to I think, is it Las Vegas quite frequently to
Yes,
try the new restaurants and things. Yeah, that's the hot spot.
it's one of them in North America for sure.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, let's shift gears a little bit here, Kee. Talk a little bit more about the businesses and the industry. And so you gave a great overview of feedlot health management services, Kee Jim Farms. Sort of two parts. Any gaps in terms of what they do and where they operate that want to fill in, and maybe more specifically to help listeners, if they don't know what a feedlot is and where it fits in the value chain of the beef industry, maybe perhaps give us a sense of what the feedlot sector is and where it fits along that spectrum.
Okay, for those not real familiar with the beef cattle industry, the primary unit of production is a cow-calf operation, or what people would think of as a ranch. So those cattle ranches are widely distributed across all of Canada, but the majority of the production occurs in Alberta and Saskatchewan, is where most of the cows are. And cows are on ranches, containing as few as 10 or 15 head, up to say 5,000 would be a large ranch. And at the ranch, that's where the cows are. And each year, cow has calf, right? And typically in the fall of the year, the calves are removed from their mothers, a process called weaning. And then they head to the feedlot phase of production, right? Or the more confined phase. Obviously, ranches are operate extensively in their grass operations, and there's many acres required per cow. Once the calves are weaned, they come to confined facilities, and these are referred to as feedlots, where they spend the next part of their life, and they're fed grain-based diets. So a feedlot is really an aggregation of pens at a given geographic site. The pens range in size from say 100 head per pen up to 350 head per pen. And obviously that site would have a feed mill, right, to prepare the feed to bring to the cattle, and it's delivered by feed trucks. These operations, range in size. Say a small feedlot would be 1,000 head, but here in Western Canada, they're up to 80,000 head per site. And then in other parts of North America, you can get up to 200,000 head per site. So they tend to be, larger operations that are, bringing cattle from the ranches. They go on full feed, they feed a grain-based diet until they reach between 1,350 and 1,550 pounds, and then they're brought from the feedlot to the processing plant or the slaughter facility. Mm-hmm. So in North America, the vast majority of cattle move through a feedlot system, because we like grain-fed beef, and you have to go to a feedlot to become grain-fed beef. So about 90% plus of our cattle go through a feedlot production phase on their way to slaughter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you mentioned that most people like the grain-fed beef? What because I know there are, the other side would be the grass-fed beef. What are some of the differences in those two?
Yeah, for most palates globally, the grain-fed beef is the most desired, right? Because it commands the highest price. So obviously people are willing to pay more for it. They're distinctly different products, right? If you've had grain-fed beef, it has a different tenderness profile, a different taste profile, right? But for most palates, they would prefer, grain-fed. There's lots of grass-fed beef in the rest of the world outside North America, particularly South America and so on. And it fits a little bit different market at a different price point. But I'm happy to report that a great grass-fed beef is still better than other forms of protein in consumer preference, right? Mm-hmm. So beef by far is the most preferred protein globally.
Yeah,
right?
No, absolutely.
And the grain-fed is considered the premier product.
Yeah, No, absolutely.
I'd say that in North America, I bet you it's less than 5% of the beef is consumed as grass-fed.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware it was that small. It's pretty
Yeah, it is small. Yeah.
pretty low percentage. Key, when you joined us back in 2020, a crisis in the industry, largely driven by some of the shutdowns and of COVID, and came up with some really critical ideas around set aside solutions for the beef industry. I wonder if you could maybe just give us your thumbnail sketch of where the industry is at right now, and are we still in any issues that we were facing back in the pandemic? Are there challenges we still need to address in the sector?
Yeah, we've had our fair share of challenges in the beef cattle sector in Canada. We had the well-documented COVID crisis related to couldn't get cattle slaughtered at the plants because they did not have people, right? With their workforces were affected by COVID. So that backed cattle up and caused, significant problems. We eventually worked our way through that inventory. But since then, we've had, a couple of years of either drought or a very short crop, right? So our feed grain production has been way off here in Western Canada. So our cost of production has gone up dramatically. And for the consumers out there, you realize that this is record high beef prices in the store. So they're going, well, how does that happen? Well, it's because the overall supply of cattle in North America is dropping related to drought there as well. So drought has reduced the availability, reduced the overall supply of cattle, and it's also increased the cost of production. So as a result, you have the highest cost beef ever, or close to it. And the feedlots haven't necessarily been all that profitable, right, in the middle of this. So for several years here in Western Canada, the profitability picture for feedlots has been questionable. And so I would say not an entirely rosy picture. This year, we're looking at, we've had limited rainfall in the south, right? In other parts of northern Alberta, Saskatchewan, etc., their rainfall has been adequate, but we're a little short here again, right? So we all have some increased concerns about cost of production. So we're looking at multi-year lows in the number of cattle available in Canada, right? And probably we'll continue to see that number drop. So tight, things are going to be a little tight for different reasons, but not nearly as severe as the crisis caused by the COVID plant issue.
That's good. We've sort of made our way through that, but as you say, still some challenges ahead. In terms of opportunities for the sector here in Alberta, what do you see as opportunities in front of us, Kee, both within the feedlot and broadly the cattle sector?
The whole utilization and incorporation of biodigesters, into feedlot production is something that's a significant opportunity as a result of the producing renewable natural gas and the whole carbon credit market, right? The large emitters are going to be forced to buy carbon credits. We could debate quite extensively whether that's a good idea, but let's start there because that's where it really starts. It's already been decided, right? We're going to be selling carbon credits. And so the opportunity that creates for biodigestion and producing renewable natural gas at feedlots is something that, is a significant opportunity for, for people to look at, but, the whole bioeconomy, and rather than look at manure as a liability, right, you can turn it into a revenue stream. Now it's not quite that simple, but there, it certainly in a lot of places would be something that needs to be looked at. Yeah. So I see that as something that's a significant opportunity. And also the utilization of roller compacted concrete, as opposed to having a dirt floor pen in feedlots, putting concrete down and improving the overall profitability by having a better environment for the cattle and being less sensitive to weather and mud and things like that. It's also a prerequisite for biodigestion. In order for the manure to be clean enough, you would need to have a roller compacted concrete in order for that to occur. Right. So I think there are a few things on the horizon that could help out feedlot production.
We'll touch a little bit more on that in just a second. I want to come back to you. Had said that growth in your operation largely was in the US. If you could tell us what sort of advantages does the US have over Canada to draw some of your growth there versus here in Canada?
It's always an unpopular discussion with politicians, but we have some real issues here in Alberta in dealing with intensive livestock production, right? And to summarize it, most Albertans don't like it, right? So if you were trying to permit a large scale feedlot in Western Canada, not just Alberta, but pretty much anywhere, good luck.
Yeah.
Right. And similarly for a biodigester, right, you have some similar issues. Here in High River, where we've been trying to get a biodigester built, that feedlot, we still haven't got final approvals yet, right, for that site after a couple of years of messing around. So that's a pretty big disappointment for me in terms of, being here for 40 years and seeing way better opportunities anywhere else. In less than 18 months, we received permits for 150,000 head feedlot in Nebraska and a digester, just as a means of contrast. Yeah. In addition to that, recently the federal government in the US, they have a 30% tax credit for any new investment in biodigesters. So why would you build one here? That whole, suddenly anyone that's thinking the new digesters are going to be built in the US, right, in conjunction with feedlots because of the 30% difference in CapEx. So better programs, a more reliable regulatory infrastructure for getting projects approved, right? And also, because the US over so many years has invested massively in irrigation infrastructure, they are the most drought-proof part of the world, right? And that's one of my really big disappointments here in Canada is that we have more fresh water than anyone in the world, right? And yet we can't figure out we should have more irrigated acres than any country in the world. Yeah. Right. But we just can't think big enough to get, to mobilize our resources, accordingly. We should be drought proof here in Western Canada, right? We shouldn't be worried about drought. There's ways around it. So, and then the other thing is the labor. Our immigration policies with respect to agricultural workers and so on is inept at best. And we just simply can't get enough people here to do the work that most Canadians don't want to do. So we've got a bunch of band-aids that we have out there trying to deal with major underlying issues. Until you get the immigration thing solved, the irrigation thing solved, and the other elephant in the room on Canadian agriculture is our supply managed sectors. Yeah. For dairy and poultry, they're major problems that nobody seems willing to address. So the more knowledgeable I get, the less interested I get in expanding in Alberta. It irritates me to no end, but it's the financial reality. Capital is mobile. Go where the best opportunities are. And right now, that's not here.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate reality. I know you've spoken passionately about the supply management issue in Canada, which doesn't seem to be likely to be broken anytime soon. And I'd imagine some of the biodigesters or funding is through the Inflation Reduction Act in the US as part of their drive to decarbonize. And we've taken a different playbook here in Canada, which I think is missing out on some really important opportunities, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, well, it drives me crazy. We have an advantage over pretty much everybody in the world, right? With respect to our, in brackets, our natural resources, right? Including the lowest cost nat gas in the world, right? I mean, we've got the tools, we just don't have, a coherent regulatory or framework for getting this all to happen. And, we also remember in the beef cattle sector, we're roughly 50% exporters of product, right? So anything goes wrong with our export markets, we're right back to the DSE situation again. Yeah. So our overall risk profile of what we're doing here in the beef cattle sector is significantly different in the US. Yeah. Right? I could sleep a lot better operating in the US than you can in Canada, that's so export dependent, right? Anything goes wrong, our markets are immediately in major chaos.
Yeah. That, and not to mention closed ports in Vancouver now, and
So,
trade disputes, etc.
What about this irrigation debacle in southern Alberta, where they got a mess up in the maintenance of the irrigation canals? I don't know the exact details, but at the end of the day, water got very short during a critical time frame for crops in southern Alberta, which is dramatically influencing the yield, right, of crops down there already. So I was like, how does that happen? Like, who's responsible for that whole mess, right? So again, I just think we stumble over ourselves in it. Maybe we just have too many resources, and if we had a lot less, we would do better, right? I don't know, right? But
no,
it's unbelievable.
You're absolutely right. I hear this consistently, that because we are such a bounty and abundance of resources here, we almost have a bit of a complacent attitude towards production, development, export. I just sort of taken for granted, I think, is one of the key challenges. There's no drive. Other countries that don't have our resources they need to create things. I think of places like Israel and South Korea.
Well, they're bold enough in what they're doing policy wise that some of these things will, that I'm advocating would require some, decisions that may not be all that popular, right? But they're fundamentally the right thing to do. Yeah. Right. I'm talking about, say, the massive irrigation project. Well, yeah, I mean, there may be some minor inconveniences along the way, but we seem here in Alberta want to please everybody in the world and be perfectly happy and have an absolutely zero impact on the environment. The criteria is zero. Well, in the real world, that doesn't happen. In these other countries that developed agricultural capacity with far less resources, they had to make trade-offs along the way, right? Trade-offs that were in the best interest overall of the economics for the society, not getting hung up on one little detail.
Yeah, and many of the alternative solutions also have their own trade-offs that unfortunately rarely get talked about in the common dialogue around them. Key, in light of what you've just said about some of the challenges here in Alberta around everything, but maybe I'll sort of call it the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard for some of these operations, whether it's the irrigation side, supply management, export reliance. What's your view for the future of the cattle and agri-food processing sector here in Alberta? Do you see?
I think we will be relatively steady state over the next 5, 10 years. I don't see a big impetus for growth, but I'm not suggesting that the industry is going to collapse and disappear either. I just think it's going to be a minor growth to a minor decline here over the next while. The factors can change that alter that, but as it turns out, we definitely have to have reliable feed grain production here in Western Canada. And whether it's climate change or whatever it is, certainly we've had more drought action in the last 5 years than we had in the previous 35. And that is an absolute devastation for us here. We cannot effectively compete with the US in feedlot production because our climate is worse, our cost of production is higher. Therefore, our feed grains have to be cheaper. It's that simple. Yeah. If not, we're not competitive, right? And it's a difficult road to hoe. Yeah. We could overcome a lot of that stuff. It's not like we couldn't overcome it. It's going to require some major changes in policy approach both federally and provincially. We need to embark on just some massive infrastructure projects that, that are substantial even by global standards.
That specifically being irrigation, or the infrastructure, yeah.
Yeah, and whatever it takes to solve the immigration thing.
On the labor
Right?
side, yeah.
Whatever surgery is, I mean, the number of people required, is staggering that's needed, right? To get it, to get us on a remotely level playing field with the US agricultural worker availability.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a staggering number, because it's not just the ag industry, right? It's the service industry. It's many other industries here in Canada that are having, difficulties day to day with staffing.
Kee, you mentioned once in an interview with TELUS Agriculture that only 2% of the population is involved in production agriculture. And what are some of the other facts or factoids surrounding the industry that you wish more people understood that might generate more support for the sector, might get people more understanding of where their food comes from? What are some things you wish more people knew about the sector?
Well, I see some encouraging signs there, right? There's been a reach out effort by a number of different groups, by CAPI, by the recently started Simpson Center here in Calgary, by the, cattlemen's associations and so on, to get some information about the beef cattle sector out there. Things like, okay, the cow is not the ultimate villain from the greenhouse gas perspective. For some perspective, it's 2% of the, GHG production in North America coming from cows, and cars and transportation are 25% of it. So it's, some of that stuff that I think people are starting to, to understand a little bit, that in many cases, cows as part of a complete ecosystem approach are, can actually be carbon sinks. The whole deal can actually decrease. Mm-hmm. So, getting to really understand the, the relationship of cows, to the environment, and overall the carbon footprint in all areas of agricultural production is generally going down, particularly in North America, as productivity continues to improve, right? So the carbon footprint of the beef industry and of the dairy industry, poultry, swine, all the major livestock is significantly below what it was 20 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So directionally, we're headed in the right direction. And as good fortune would have it, there's a couple of products that are being developed that are probably major innovations in beef cattle production. One's a seaweed product, and another is a product called 3-NOP that are going to really decrease the methane production in cattle at the feedlot phase, very significantly, right? So there's mitigations on the way that are going to decrease carbon footprint of cattle. And so I think there's some encouraging things out there from an environmental sustainability perspective that, I think that I sense the tide is turning in that overall people's view of cows and the cattle industry is improving. And maybe that's because I just like to believe that, mm-hmm. Right? But it certainly feels that way to me. And I think also the beef industry overall is not insignificant in Canada, right? It contributes about 50-some billion to the GDP annually, and directly or indirectly, it's about 350,000 jobs here in Canada. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think that people are starting to realize the overall economic relevance more. Basis beef demand and overall consumption, beef demand is continuing to improve, and we've had the highest prices ever, right? So it tells me that the consumer acceptance, or, if they were feeling really bad about beef and beef cattle, we wouldn't be in this situation where our product continues to move through the shelf at record high prices.
Everybody loves their good Alberta beef, right?
Exactly.
No one wants to give that up. That's for sure. Definitely not me. Kee, I was curious, you mentioned something about this seaweed. Is that in replacement of the grain feed, or is that an augmentation?
No, it's a feed additive. It would be fed at a small percentage of the diet, maybe 1 or 2% of the diet. small inclusion level, but responsible for a significant reduction in methane. Now, these products will take a while to get developed and get implemented, but it does look like either or both of those products is going to be a big deal.
That's great. But anything that we can do to keep bringing down some of that emission profile is highly important. And Kee, we're at the home stretch here. I've got two questions left. One is pretty micro, the other one's kind of macro picture. So micro question: you're a chef, you're deep in the cattle sector. What's your favorite cut to work with as a chef?
Favorite cut of beef to work with?
Beef to work with, yeah.
Oh, I'm very partial to ribeye steak.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely the best piece out there. But also, I enjoy working with what's called outside skirt as well. Right.
Oh, okay.
Kind of meat there to marinate it and quickly cook it on the barbecue.
Okay.
Hard to beat.
Interesting. Yeah, the ribeye is just that beautiful marbling and just a nice piece of beef. The outside skirt, is that, I don't think I've seen that one in the stores. Is that a pretty unique cut?
You'll see it occasionally. There's inside skirt and then an outside skirt. Outside is a little more tender, but you'll see it in the same area where they usually have the flank steak and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But yeah, it's a great cut.
Yeah. My favorite one, I credit this because my wife is Brazilian, but it's known as the Brazilian cut, the picanha, it's the sirloin top cap. I just find that despite not having much marbling in the cut, it has this big strip of fat at the top that I just find keeps the whole piece just so tender. It's just I love cooking with that one. It's a great cut.
Yeah, that's a fan. But the great thing about beef is that from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail, there's many different eating experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
From brisket, to prime rib, you've got oxtail, you've got tongue, you've got a lot of things that are different flavor profiles, different cooking methods, all within one animal. Yeah. Right. So pretty unique thing to work with. And yeah, I would say that I probably eat 5 days a week.
There you go. Well, you're heavily invested in many ways. As we close, last question, more at the macro level, despite some of the uncompetitive aspects here in Alberta, and not just for your sector, but I'd ask you to think maybe broadly the long-term view for Alberta, its future. Are you excited? Are you concerned? Where are we heading, and what do we need to do to make sure we land in the right place 10 years out here in Alberta?
I guess I would say that I'm cautiously optimistic, right? That we can get, many of the things that we've discussed with the right, not just political environment, but with the various impacts of the various business groups, including yourselves. Alberta's have always been blessed with a lot of first-rate entrepreneurs that have figured out ways of dealing with whatever is in front of them and get things done. So there's been a lot of very marvelous success stories in a multitude of businesses here, across Alberta. So, I think we're going to do pretty well, over the next 10 years across the entire economy. I just wish that, we, rather than say, we're doing okay, we don't really need to change much, right? I just wish that our politicians and all of our leaders, municipally, civically, etc., get out of that mode of we're doing okay, and why don't we want to be excellent? Why don't we want to excel? And why don't we really want to, move along? Because we have we have the natural resources and we have the people resources to get a lot of this done, right? But if we create a regulatory environment and a political environment that is more focused on status quo or fighting with somebody than figuring out how to collaborate and really move the goalposts, and be willing to do, if you look globally, where governments have been highly successful in stimulating a portion of the economy is where they're prepared to be bold, right? And they're prepared to step out there and take the wrath of the detractors and push it through and get it done if it's the right thing to do, right? And that's what we really lack here, is we really lack politicians with thick enough skin, right, to get, hey, what's the worst thing that can happen? You won't get elected again 4 years later. right? But they seem to want to be elected for the rest of their life or something, because once you get in, you got 4 years to really get it done. And in our way of doing things, you're pretty much king for 4 years.
Yep.
Right. So you can get a lot of things done if you have thick enough skin and you're prepared to bash ahead with a defined agenda and pay very little attention to those left whining.
Yeah, it's political will, political courage, essential ingredients that we need to make sure we encourage and create the room for as we try and create the right path for Alberta. So with that, Kee, thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us, telling us about your story, your journey, the sector, your favorite cut of beef, and many things in between. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and have a good day.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta, and you can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. And we'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB on Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and YouTube. And if you liked this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.